My identical twin sister didn't just betray me, she erased me completely. While I was sedated in a psychiatric ward, fighting to remember my own name, she was tucking my children into bed, sleeping next to my husband, and accepting promotions at my job. For 3 years, she lived my life so perfectly that when I finally escaped, my own family thought I was the imposter trying to steal hers. You have to understand, Emma and I weren't just twins. We were best friends, confidants, each other's whole world growing up. People always said we were like two halves of the same person, finishing each other's sentences, sharing clothes, dreams, everything. But I was always the one who took the lead, the one who spoke up first, who got things done. I had built what I thought was the perfect life by 32. My marketing firm was thriving, my husband David loved me deeply, and our twin boys, Jake and Michael, were the light of my existence. Every morning, I'd wake up in our suburban home, kiss David goodbye, drop the kids at school, and head to work where my team looked up to me. I was living my dream. Emma had struggled more. She'd bounced between jobs, had a series of failed relationships, and often came to me for support. "You're so lucky, Sarah," she'd say, watching me tuck the boys into bed when she visited. "You have everything I've ever wanted." I'd hug her, tell her she'd find her path too, never imagining those words were a confession of intent. The signs started small. Emma began spending more time at our house, offering to help with the kids when David traveled for work. She'd study how I interacted with them, how I styled my hair, even mimicking my mannerisms. "We're so alike," she'd laugh. "Sometimes I forget which one of us is which." I thought it was harmless twin behavior. I was so wrong. Chapter 2. The Slow Poison. The changes began subtly. I started feeling tired all the time, forgetting appointments, losing track of conversations mid-sentence. David would find me staring blankly at my computer screen or discover me standing in the kitchen, unable to remember why I'd come downstairs. He suggested, "Maybe it's stress. You've been working so hard lately." But it wasn't stress. Emma had been slowly, methodically dosing my morning coffee with a carefully researched combination of sedatives and memory-affecting substances. She'd researched everything: what wouldn't show up on standard tests, what would create the exact symptoms she needed. She was there through it all, the concerned sister. When I'd call her confused about missing a meeting, she'd rush over with worried eyes. "Sarah, this isn't like you. Maybe you should see someone." When I couldn't remember picking up the kids from school because she'd done it, claiming I'd asked her to, she'd hold my hands with fake sympathy. "I'm worried about you." The psychological manipulation was masterful. She'd move things in my house, change appointments in my calendar, have conversations with David about my concerning behavior, just loud enough for me to overhear. She was systematically making me doubt my own mind while positioning herself as the stable, caring sister trying to help. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning. I woke up feeling more disoriented than ever, my reflection in the mirror seeming foreign somehow. Emma was already in my kitchen, making breakfast for my boys, wearing my clothes. "Sarah," David said carefully, "we need to talk." They'd arranged an intervention. David, my parents, my business partner, all sitting in my living room with expressions of painful concern. Emma sat beside my mother, holding her hand supportively. "We're worried about your mental health," David began, his voice breaking. "The memory issues, the confusion, finding you talking to yourself. Emma thinks, and we agree, that you need professional help." I tried to protest, tried to explain that something was wrong, that Emma was behind this somehow, but every word that came out of my mouth sounded exactly like what a person having a psychological breakdown would say. The more desperately I insisted I was fine, the more convinced they became that I wasn't. Emma had prepared for this moment perfectly. She had documentation of my episodes, witness statements about my erratic behavior, even video footage she'd secretly recorded me during my most confused moments. To everyone else, she looked like a devoted sister trying to save her twin from complete mental collapse. She found several bottles of pills hidden in her bedroom, Emma told the group, producing prescription bottles I'd never seen before. I think she's been self-medicating, which is making everything worse. The pills were real. Emma had been collecting them for months, creating a false medical history of my supposed attempts to treat myself. She'd even set up appointments with doctors using my identity, describing symptoms I'd never experienced, building a paper trail of mental instability. When the commitment papers were signed, I was too confused and chemically compromised to fight effectively. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I saw Emma watching from the window, her face a perfect mask of sisterly concern. But for just a moment, when she thought no one was looking, I caught a glimpse of something else in her expression. Satisfaction. Meadowbrook Psychiatric Facility became my prison for the next 3 years. Emma had chosen well. It was an expensive, reputable institution where the staff genuinely believed they were helping me recover from a severe psychological break. The cruelest part wasn't the confinement or the medication. It was the visiting room sessions where Emma would come to see me, playing the role of the grieving sister, watching her twins struggle with mental illness. "I've been taking care of Jake and Michael," she'd tell me, tears in her eyes. "They ask about Mommy, but they're adjusting. David's been so strong through all this." She'd show me pictures on her phone, my children at birthday parties I'd never attended, family dinners where she sat in my chair, Christmas mornings where she was the mother figure opening presents with them. The most devious part was how she'd occasionally let the mask slip just enough to keep me fighting, but not enough to prove anything to the doctors. "They love their new mommy," she whispered once when the nurse stepped away. "Sometimes I think they've forgotten about the sick one." Dr. Martinez, my primary psychiatrist, was a kind man who genuinely wanted to help me recover my identity confusion. That's what she had convinced everyone this was, a psychological break where I believed my sister was stealing my life, when in reality, I was the one struggling to distinguish between my memories and hers. "Sarah," he'd say during our sessions, "can you tell me about your children's last birthday party?" But I couldn't, because Emma had orchestrated it when I was already committed. When I'd insist I'd never planned a superhero theme, never bought those specific decorations, she'd show me photos Emma had doctored of me supposedly at the party, photos she had doctored with frightening skill. The pharmaceutical cocktail they kept me on made everything hazy, but it also gradually cleared the substances Emma had been feeding me. As my mind began to sharpen, the full scope of her betrayal became crystal clear. She hadn't just taken my life, she'd rebuilt it in her image, making it better, more organized, more perfect than I'd ever managed. By year 2, I'd learned to play the game. I attended therapy sessions, took my medication, participated in group activities, and, most importantly, I stopped insisting on the delusion that Emma had stolen my identity. The doctors saw this as progress toward recovery. But privately, I was studying everything. I memorized the staff schedules, learned which security cameras had blind spots, and most crucially, I began documenting every inconsistency in the story Emma had built. She'd been too thorough in some ways, not thorough enough in others. The woman living my life was a perfected version. She kept a cleaner house, was more organized with the children's schedules, even improved relationships with neighbors I'd never gotten along with. But she'd also changed small things that only I would know. Preferences and habits so ingrained they were like DNA. During visiting sessions, I'd carefully probe. "Remember how Jake always had to have his sandwiches cut diagonally?" I'd ask. "Oh, yes," Emma would nod. "He still does. But Jake had always preferred rectangles." Emma had changed it, probably thinking triangles were more normal or appealing. It was a tiny detail, but to me, it was proof. I began to understand that beating Emma wouldn't be about proving my sanity to the doctors. They were too invested in their diagnosis. It would be about getting out and systematically reclaiming pieces of my life while exposing her deception to the people who mattered. The hardest part was watching my children grow up through photos and brief supervised visits. Jake had started playing soccer, something I'd always encouraged, but Emma had made happen. Michael had gotten glasses. Had his vision been getting worse while I was gone? They were polite with me during visits, the way children are with distant relatives they barely remember. "How are you feeling today, Sarah?" Michael asked once, using the careful, gentle tone adults had obviously taught him to use with the sick aunt. That night, I made a decision that would either free me or destroy me completely. I was going to escape, and I was going to take back my life piece by piece. Planning an escape from a psychiatric facility isn't like the movies. You can't just overpower guards or break down doors. You have to become someone they trust, someone they believe is getting better, while secretly mapping every exit and timing every shift change. It took me 6 months of perfect behavior to earn ground privileges, supervised walks around the facility's garden, another 3 months before those walks became routine enough that the staff grew comfortable. Jenny, the daytime orderly, was kind but distracted, often taking personal calls during our walks. I'd been studying the maintenance schedule, watching delivery trucks, memorizing the code Jenny punched into the garden gate. The opportunity came during a busy Tuesday when 3 new patients were being admitted and the staff was stretched thin. During our usual garden walk, Jenny stepped away to handle an emergency inside. I had maybe 10 minutes before she'd notice I was gone. The maintenance gate was unlocked. The groundskeeping crew was working on the other side of the facility. Walking away from Meadowbrook was terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in 3 years, I was making my own choices, going where I wanted to go. But I was also a fugitive now, and every siren I heard made me fear they were coming for me. I'd hidden some money from Emma's visiting cash over the months, carefully saving dollar bills. It was enough for a bus ticket to the city, enough for a few days in a cheap motel while I figured out my next move. The reflection in the bathroom mirror was a stranger. 3 years older, institutionalized pallor, haircut in the practical style they maintained at Meadowbrook. But underneath, I was still Sarah. I had to believe that. My first stop was my old marketing firm. Emma had been running it in my absence, and according to the website, business was thriving. She'd won awards, landed major clients, even expanded to a second location. She'd become a better version of me professionally. I watched from across the street as she left the building at 6 p.m. sharp, more organized than I'd ever been. She'd styled her hair differently, carried herself with a confidence I remembered having but had somehow lost even before the commitment. She was wearing my favorite power suit, but it looked better on her somehow, more natural. Following her led me to my own house, where I watched through windows as she helped Jake with homework while Michael practiced piano. David came home at 7:30 p.m., kissed her hello, and they moved around the kitchen preparing dinner with an easy domesticity that looked happy. This was the cruelest revelation. Emma hadn't just stolen my life, she'd improved it. My children looked healthier, happier. My husband seemed more relaxed. Even the house looked better maintained. She'd taken my imperfect life and perfected it. But it was still my life. Those were still my children, my husband, my dreams being lived by someone else. I spent weeks documenting everything. Emma had been meticulous in maintaining the illusion. But 3 years of living as someone else had left traces. She'd changed my handwriting slightly, more controlled, less hurried.
She'd developed relationships with neighbors I'd barely spoken to. She'd even altered my parenting style, becoming more structured, more patient than I'd ever managed to be. The medical records were the key. I needed to prove that the Sarah who'd been committed had been systematically poisoned, that the symptoms Emma documented were artificially induced. But accessing those records meant risking exposure before I was ready. I finally approached David at his office, 3 weeks after my escape. Security tried to stop me, but I knew his schedule, knew he'd be leaving through the back entrance to avoid traffic. "Sarah," he said, and for a moment his face showed pure joy before confusion took over. "But you're supposed to be... How did you get out?" "David, it's me, the real me. Emma has been lying to everyone." He looked at me like a stranger, which I suppose I was after 3 years. The woman he'd been living with had been more organized, more emotionally stable, better at managing the household and children. I was the messy, desperate, clearly troubled version standing in a parking garage, trying to convince him his life was a lie. "Sarah, you're not supposed to be here," he said gently. "The doctors said you might try to... We need to call Dr. Martinez. Please, just listen. Ask me something only I would know. Ask me about our first date, about what I whispered to you on our wedding night, about the scar on Jake's knee from when he fell off his bike." But Emma had 3 years to extract those details, to learn the intimate history of my marriage. When David asked me about our honeymoon in Italy, I told him about the small restaurant where we'd shared tiramisu, about how he'd been nervous about his terrible Italian. But as I spoke, I realized Emma could have learned all of this from photo albums, from David's own stories told over pillow talk. That's exactly what Emma said you might do," he said, backing away. "She said you might remember fragments, might seem like the real Sarah, but that it was part of your condition." Emma had predicted this moment, prepared him for it. She'd probably rehearsed how to handle my eventual escape, how to respond to my claims. She'd made herself seem like the stable, rational one, and me like the dangerous, delusional imposter. He called the police. As I ran through that parking garage, I realized Emma's greatest weapon wasn't just her deception, it was that she'd made herself indispensable. She'd become a better version of me, and everyone preferred her.
I couldn't approach my family directly. Emma had poisoned them against me too thoroughly. Instead, I went underground, using skills I developed at Meadowbrook to blend in, to observe without being seen. I got a job at a coffee shop near Jake's school, wearing a wig and glasses, hoping to catch glimpses of my children. Emma dropped them off every morning at 8:15 sharp, walked them to the door, always perfectly put together. The other mothers clearly liked her. She'd integrated into the school community in ways I'd never managed when I was scattered and busy with work. But I knew my children in ways Emma couldn't fake. I watched Jake bouncing anxiously before tests. He'd always done that ever since kindergarten. I saw Michael automatically avoiding the cracks in the sidewalk, a quirky habit that had nothing to do with the way Emma presented their lives. More importantly, I began to see the subtle signs of Emma's control. She'd made small changes to their personalities, discouraging behaviors she found annoying, encouraging traits she preferred. Jake was more subdued than he'd ever been, his natural exuberance dampened. Michael had always been artistic, but now he focused primarily on academic activities Emma deemed more valuable. She was raising my children to be perfect, but they weren't being allowed to be themselves. The breakthrough came through Jake's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. During a parent conference I observed from the hallway, she mentioned something that made Emma visibly uncomfortable. "Jake's been asking about his other mommy again," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "I know you've explained about your sister's illness, but he seems to have very specific memories. Should we be concerned?" Emma's response was too quick, too rehearsed.
Children sometimes have difficulty processing mental illness in the family. Jake is just confused about which memories are real. But I saw the flash of panic in her eyes. Jake remembered me. Despite 3 years of careful manipulation, my son remembered his real mother. I began leaving small gifts where Jake would find them. Origami cranes made from his favorite colored paper, the kind of tiny presents I used to surprise him with. Emma couldn't understand where they were coming from, and her confusion was the first crack in her perfect facade. Michael was harder to reach, but I remembered his love for a specific series of mystery books. I started leaving new volumes from the series in places he'd discover them. The library where Emma took them for homework sessions, the park where they played on weekends. Slowly, carefully, I was reminding my children that someone else had loved them first. Someone who knew their preferences and quirks in ways their current mother didn't quite match. The risk was enormous. If Emma figured out what I was doing, she could move the family, change the routines, make it impossible for me to maintain contact. Worse, she could claim their deceased mother was haunting them, use it as evidence of her ongoing mental instability. But Jake began asking questions. During one of my coffee shop observations, I heard him through the school's open windows asking Emma why she couldn't make pancakes the way the other mommy used to. Emma's response was sharp, frustrated. The first time I'd seen her perfect maternal facade slip. Jake, we've talked about this. Your mommy makes pancakes perfectly fine. But they taste different. And you cut my sandwiches wrong. Michael, quieter but more observant, had been watching Emma carefully. Children are natural detectives when something doesn't feel right in their world. He'd noticed the small changes in routine, in responses, in the way Emma loved them. Perfectly, but not quite the way he remembered being loved before. While reconnecting with my children, I'd been working with a sympathetic private investigator named Marcus Chen. He was expensive, but he believed my story, or at least he believed it enough to help me gather evidence. The medical records from my commitment were revealing. Emma had been incredibly thorough in documenting my supposed symptoms, but Marcus found inconsistencies, timestamps that didn't match up, hand-writing analyses that showed subtle differences, and most importantly, blood work from my early days at Meadowbrook that showed traces of substances I should never have been exposed to. Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychiatrist Marcus knew, agreed to review my case. She was particularly interested in the specific combination of symptoms Emma had documented: memory loss, confusion, and personality changes that perfectly matched a cocktail of drugs that would be difficult to detect without specific testing. This is either the most documented case of rapid-onset psychiatric illness I've ever seen, or it's an incredibly sophisticated case of induced symptoms. The pattern is almost too perfect. She helped me understand Emma's method. By gradually introducing specific substances into my system while simultaneously gaslighting me about my symptoms, Emma had created a perfect storm of confusion that made commitment seem like the only reasonable option. But proving it would require more than medical speculation. We needed concrete evidence of Emma's deception, something that would hold up in court and convince my family that the woman they'd been living with for 3 years was an elaborate fraud. The opportunity came through Emma's own success. She'd built my marketing business into something impressive enough to attract attention from a major firm looking to acquire us. The celebration party was scheduled at our house, my house, with clients, employees, and family attending. I'd spent months preparing for this moment. With Marcus's help, I'd gathered documentation, medical evidence, and witness testimony. I'd also done something Emma couldn't have anticipated. I'd learned to be better than I used to be. 3 years of fighting for my sanity had made me stronger, more focused, more determined than I'd ever been before. I'd studied Emma's improvements to my life and absorbed the lessons. I could be the organized, confident, successful woman she'd pretended to be, but I could do it while still being authentically myself. The night of the party, I slipped into my house through the back door I'd had installed years earlier, a security feature only I knew about because Emma had been too focused on the visible aspects of my life to discover all its secrets. I watched from the shadows as Emma played hostess in my living room, wearing my clothes, accepting congratulations for achievements built on my foundation. David stood beside her, proud and supportive, while Jake and Michael served as perfect children showing off for company. It was time to reclaim my life. I waited until the party was in full swing, until Emma was surrounded by business associates and neighbors, all celebrating her success. Then I walked into my living room like I owned it, because I did. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Guests who didn't know about the twin sister situation were confused by seeing two identical women. Those who did know looked shocked and concerned. The mental patient had clearly escaped and was having some kind of episode. But my children's reactions were different. Jake's face lit up with recognition and joy before confusion set in. Michael stared at both of us, his analytical mind trying to process what he was seeing. "Hello, Emma," I said calmly. "Thank you for taking care of my family while I was away." Emma's response was perfect. The concerned sister faced with her delusional twin. "Sarah, how did you get here? We need to call Dr. Martinez immediately. You shouldn't be around the children when you're having an episode." But I was ready for this. Marcus stepped in from the kitchen where he'd been waiting, along with Dr. Williams and a family court mediator we'd arranged to have present. "Actually," I said, "I think it's time everyone learned the truth about which one of us is which." The next hour was brutal for everyone involved. Dr. Williams presented the medical evidence, while Marcus laid out the timeline of Emma's deception. I answered questions about intimate family details, but so did Emma. She'd had 3 years to learn everything about my life. The real proof came from the children themselves. When asked to approach their real mother, Jake ran to me immediately, guided by instincts deeper than memory. Michael was more cautious, but when I spoke something only his real mother would know, the secret name he'd given his stuffed animal, something he'd never told anyone else, his careful reserve cracked. "Mommy," he said. And the word carried 3 years of confusion and buried recognition. David's world was collapsing in real time. The woman he'd been living with, sleeping beside, building a life with for 3 years, was not his wife. But she was also the mother his children had known. The partner who'd been there through their daily struggles, the person who'd become integral to their lives.
As the evidence mounted and the room turned against her, Emma finally dropped her mask. The concerned sister disappeared, replaced by someone I'd never seen before. Bitter, desperate, and completely unrepentant. "You want to know the truth?" she said, her voice shaking with years of suppressed rage. "Fine. Sarah had everything I ever wanted she just fell into. The perfect husband, the beautiful children, the successful business. And what did she do with it? She was careless, distracted, always complaining about how hard her life was." The room was silent as Emma's real feelings poured out. I watched her waste every blessing she'd been given while I struggled with nothing. So yes, I took it. I took her life and I made it better. Look at this house. It's cleaner, more organized than she ever kept it. Look at the children. They're happier, more well-behaved, more successful in school. Look at the business. I've tripled its value in 3 years. She turned to David with desperate eyes. "Tell them, David. Tell them how much better your life has been with me. How much more peaceful, how much more organized, how much happier you've been." David's face was a mask of horror and confusion. Because Emma wasn't wrong. Life had been easier with her, but it had also been built on lies, manipulation, and the systematic erasure of my actual wife. "You drugged me," I said quietly. "You stole 3 years of my children's lives. You had me committed to a psychiatric facility and let me believe I was losing my mind." "You were losing your mind," Emma screamed. "You were barely functional, Sarah. Always scattered, always stressed, never appreciating what you had. I didn't steal your life. I saved it." The twisted logic was terrifying because it contained threads of truth.
Emma had improved many aspects of my life by taking it over. But she'd done it through unforgivable means, and she'd erased my children's real mother in the process. The legal battle that followed was complex and painful. Emma was arrested for fraud, identity theft, and falsifying medical records, but the damage to my family was harder to repair than any crime. Jake adapted quickly. He was young enough that his memories of me were strong, and his joy at having his real mommy back was uncomplicated. But Michael struggled. Emma had been his primary mother figure for most of his childhood. While he intellectually understood she wasn't his real mother, emotionally, she was the person who'd been there for him. David was devastated. He'd fallen in love with Emma thinking she was me, had built 3 years of intimacy and partnership with someone who was essentially a stranger. The woman he'd been married to was both his wife and not his wife, both the mother of his children and an imposter. "I don't know how to feel about anything," he told me during one of our painful reconciliation conversations. "I love you, Sarah. I never stopped loving you. But the woman I've been living with, I loved her too, and she doesn't exist." Rebuilding our marriage required therapy, patience, and the acknowledgement that we were essentially strangers who shared a history. The Sarah who'd been committed 3 years ago was different from the Sarah who'd survived Meadowbrook and fought her way back. The David who'd lived with Emma was different from the David I'd left behind. The business was legally mine, but Emma's improvements were real. Clients had relationships with her, not me. Employees had been working under her leadership. Taking back what was mine meant potentially destroying what she'd built. Most painfully, I had to acknowledge that in some ways, Emma had been a better version of me. More organized, more patient with the children, more focused on the business. She'd lived my life more successfully than I had. But she'd lived it by erasing me completely. 2 years after reclaiming my identity, life had settled into something that resembled normal, but would never be the same. David and I were rebuilding our marriage slowly, learning to trust each other again. The children were in therapy, processing the complex trauma of having their reality completely upended. Emma was serving a reduced sentence after a plea bargain, spending her time in prison rather than a psychiatric facility. I visited her once, trying to understand how my twin sister, my best friend, had been able to do what she had done. "Do you regret it?" I asked her. She looked at me for a long moment, her face showing flashes of the sister I'd once loved. "I regret getting caught," she said finally. "But I don't regret showing everyone that I could be a better Sarah than you ever were." Even in prison, she couldn't acknowledge the fundamental violation of what she had done. To Emma, it had been a justified correction of an unfair universe that had given me everything she wanted. The hardest part of moving forward was accepting that her assessment wasn't entirely wrong. I had been scattered, stressed, and imperfect in my previous life. But those flaws were mine, part of who I was, part of what made my love for my family authentic rather than performed. Now I tried to incorporate Emma's improvements while staying true to myself. I was more organized but still spontaneous, more patient but still passionate, more focused but still flexible. I'd learned from watching her live my life, but I was living it as myself. Jake had few lasting effects from the experience. His resilience in youth protected him. Michael was more complicated, sometimes looking at me like he was comparing me to the mother he'd known during his most formative years. But slowly, he was learning to love the real me, imperfections and all. The business thrived under my returned leadership, though it took time to rebuild relationships Emma had developed. Some clients preferred her style, her approach, her version of Sarah Thompson. Losing them hurt, but keeping the ones who accepted the real me felt more honest. 3 years after my return, I still wake up sometimes wondering if I'm the real Sarah or if I'm Emma having an elaborate delusion. The psychological damage from that level of gaslighting doesn't disappear completely. I have moments of doubt, times when I catch myself checking my reflection to make sure I'm really me.
David and I renewed our vows on our 15th wedding anniversary, but it was bittersweet. We were committing to building something new together rather than reclaiming what we'd lost. The marriage we had before was gone, replaced by something more intentional but less innocent. I need you to know, he told me during our new wedding ceremony. I'm choosing you, not just because you're my wife, not just because you're the mother of my children, but because I'm learning to love who you really are. It was the most romantic and most heartbreaking thing he'd ever said to me. The children adapted in their own ways. Jake threw himself into sports and activities as if he could outrun the confusion of his early childhood. Michael became fascinated with psychology and identity, determined to understand what had happened to his family. Both boys were protective of me in ways children shouldn't have to be, always checking that I was really their mom, really staying, really going to be there. My relationship with my parents never fully recovered. They'd chosen to believe Emma over me during the commitment process, and while they understood intellectually that they'd been deceived, emotionally they struggled with the guilt of having abandoned their real daughter. "We thought we were helping you," my mother said during one painful family dinner. "Emma was so convincing, so concerned, so competent." There it was again. Emma had been the better version. Even my parents who'd raised me, who should have known the difference, had preferred her.
In therapy, I worked to understand how Emma had justified what she'd done. Dr. Peterson, my new psychiatrist, helped me see the complex psychology behind identity theft between twins. Emma likely experienced what we call merged identity disorder, she explained. Growing up as an identical twin, she may never have developed a strong sense of individual self. When she saw you succeeding in areas where she was struggling, the line between wanting your life and believing she deserved it became blurred. This helped me understand, but not forgive. Emma had made choices every day for years to continue the deception. She'd watched me suffer in the psychiatric facility, had seen my children asking about their real mother, had slept next to my husband knowing she was living a lie. But understanding her psychology helped me heal. Emma's actions weren't about my inadequacy. They were about her inability to build her own life, her own identity, her own relationships. She'd been so focused on what I had that she'd never developed who she was. In some ways, I felt sorry for her. She was serving time for crimes that grew out of a lifetime of feeling like she was only half a person, always comparing herself to me, always finding herself lacking. But pity didn't erase the damage or excuse the betrayal. 5 years after reclaiming my life, I'm not the same person who was committed to Meadowbrook, and I'm not trying to be. That Sarah was imperfect but unbroken. This Sarah is stronger but scarred, more focused but less trusting, more appreciative but less innocent. I've learned to live with the knowledge that someone I loved completely was capable of destroying me systematically. I've learned that the people who love me can be fooled, can choose an imposter over the real me if that imposter is polished enough. But I've also learned that identity is more than performance. Emma could copy my mannerisms, improve my habits, even love my family, but she couldn't be me. The connection between Jake and me when he ran to his real mother, Michael's recognition when I whispered his secret name, these weren't things that could be faked or learned. They came from years of authentic relationship, from being present for the small moments that build a life. The business card on my desk reads Sarah Thompson, CEO, just like it did before. But now I know the weight of that name. I know what it means to have it stolen, to fight for it, to prove I deserve to carry it. My marriage is different now, built on choice rather than assumption, on conscious commitment rather than comfortable routine. David and I date each other again, learning who we've become through this trauma. Some days are harder than others, but the love we're building feels more intentional, more precious, because we know how easily it can be lost. Emma was released after serving 4 years. I knew she'd contact me eventually. Our connection had always been too deep to sever completely, even after everything she'd done. She called on a Tuesday evening while I was helping Michael with his college applications. He was 17 now, applying to psychology programs, determined to understand the human mind in ways that might prevent what happened to our family. Sarah, Emma's voice was different, smaller, uncertain in ways I'd never heard from her. I need to see you. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us held the advantage. Emma looked older, thinner, her hair cut short in a style that made her look less like me than she had in years. She said, "I wanted to apologize," without preamble. I waited. After everything we'd been through, I owed her nothing, not even a response. She continued, "I know that's not enough. I know I destroyed your life, our family, everything, but I need you to understand I never meant for it to go as far as it did. You had me committed to a psychiatric facility, Emma. You let me believe I was losing my mind for 3 years. How much further could it have gone?" She flinched. I convinced myself that you'd be better off away from the stress, that the kids would be happier with someone more stable, that David deserved a wife who had her life together. You convinced yourself that you deserved my life more than I did. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "I did. And I was wrong, but not for the reasons you think." This surprised me. "What do you mean?" "I thought I could be a better you than you were. And maybe I was in some ways. The house was cleaner, the business more profitable, the children more disciplined. But I couldn't be their real mother. I couldn't love David the way you did. Everything I built was hollow because it was built on lies." She looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the sister I'd once shared everything with. "You want to know what my real punishment was? It wasn't prison. It was having to live every day knowing that the children I raised, the man I loved, the life I built, none of it was really mine. Even when I was succeeding at being you, I was failing at being me." I didn't forgive Emma that day, or the next, or even the next year. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't a decision you make once. It's a choice you have to make repeatedly, sometimes daily, sometimes hourly. But I did begin to understand that carrying hatred for my sister was another way of letting her control my life. The anger was poisoning my relationships with my children, my marriage with David, my ability to enjoy the life I'd fought so hard to reclaim. Emma moved across the country after our coffee shop meeting. She sent letters occasionally, updates on her therapy, her attempts to build an authentic life for herself, her genuine progress in understanding what she'd done wrong. I didn't respond to most of them, but I kept them. They were evidence that the sister I'd once loved was still somewhere inside the person who'd betrayed me so completely. The last letter came on my 40th birthday. "Sarah, I know I have no right to write to you. No right to expect you to read this, but I wanted you to know that I've spent every day of the last 6 years trying to become someone worthy of being your sister again. Not trying to be you, not trying to be better than you, but trying to be Emma in a way I never learned how to be when we were growing up. I'm in therapy. I'm building genuine relationships with people who know my real history. I'm working at a job where I earned my position through my own efforts, not by stealing someone else's achievements. I know I can never undo what I did to you, to your children, to David. I know I destroyed something beautiful and irreplaceable. But I want you to know that your strength in fighting back, in reclaiming your life, in rebuilding what I broke, it saved me too. Watching you refuse to disappear, refuse to let me erase you, taught me that we are more than just interchangeable pieces. You are Sarah. You always were, even when I tried to steal that from you. And I'm Emma, flawed, struggling, but finally real. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that the little girl who used to build blanket forts with you, who shared her deepest secrets with you, who loved you more than anyone in the world, she's still here. She's sorry. She's trying to be better. Your sister, Emma." I cried reading that letter, not just for what Emma had done, but for what we'd lost, the perfect twin bond we had as children, the innocent love we had before jealousy and competition destroyed it.
2 years later, Emma called to tell me she was getting married to a man named Robert who knew her complete history, who'd fallen in love with the real Emma, flawed, complicated, and honest about her past. "I wanted you to hear it from me," she said. "I know it's strange, me calling you about this, but you're still my sister, and this is the first real thing I've done in my adult life. I wanted to share it with you." I surprised myself by saying, "I'm happy for you, Emma, really." And I meant it. Hearing that she'd found someone who loved her for herself, not for her ability to imitate me or be a better version of someone else, felt like justice in a way prison never had. "Would you," she started, then stopped. "No, never mind. I have no right to ask." "Ask anyway." "Would you consider meeting Robert, not for my wedding, I know that's too much, but maybe just, I'd like him to meet the sister I used to have, the person I measured myself against for so many years. I think he should know who you are." I thought about it for a long time. Meeting Emma's fiancé felt like stepping back into a relationship I'd fought so hard to escape. But it also felt like a way to finally close the circle, to meet the man who'd accomplished what no one else had, loving Emma for who she actually was. We met at the same coffee shop where Emma and I had our first post-prison conversation. Robert was nothing like David. Quieter, more serious, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that seemed to calm Emma's nervous energy. "Emma's told me everything," he said simply, "about what she did to you, about the years in prison, about her struggle to understand herself. I know you have no reason to trust my judgment, but I believe she's genuinely changed." I watched Emma during this conversation, saw how she looked at Robert with pure gratitude and love. It was different from how she'd looked at David, less possessive, more generous. She wasn't trying to become the perfect partner for Robert. She was just being herself and trusting that it was enough. "She talks about you constantly," Robert continued, "not with jealousy anymore, but with respect, with admiration for how you survived what she put you through and rebuilt your life." Emma reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close enough that I could feel the gesture. "Sarah, I know I can never be your sister the way I was before. I know I destroyed that. But I hope someday we might be something new. Two people who share history and DNA and maybe eventually forgiveness." I didn't attend Emma's wedding, but I sent a gift. Not something expensive or meaningful, just a simple photo frame with a picture of us as children building one of our elaborate blanket forts. Emma called me crying after she received it. "Thank you," she whispered, "for reminding me who we used to be before I ruined everything." I said, "We were children then. We didn't know how complicated life would get, how much we could hurt each other, but we loved each other completely." "I still love you," Emma said. "I know I have no right to say that after what I did, but I never stopped loving you. Even when I was stealing your life, I was doing it because I loved you so much I wanted to be you." "I know," I said. And I did know, finally. Emma's betrayal had come from a twisted form of love, a desperate desire to be close to me that had consumed her ability to be herself. "I love you too," I admitted. "I hate what you did. I'm still healing from it. But you're my sister. That doesn't go away even when everything else does." Jake graduated high school this year, valedictorian of his class. In his speech, he talked about resilience, about how families can survive anything if they choose love over convenience, truth over comfort. "My family went through something most people can't imagine," he said, looking directly at me in the audience. "We learned that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day. It's choosing to believe in someone even when the evidence suggests you shouldn't. It's fighting for relationships even when it would be easier to walk away." Michael, now a college junior studying psychology, has written his senior thesis on identity theft between siblings. He interviewed me, David, Emma, and dozens of other families who've experienced similar betrayals. His research is groundbreaking, offering insights into prevention and recovery that could help other families avoid our trauma. What happened to us was terrible, he told me recently, but maybe we can use it to help other people. Maybe we can make sure no other family has to go through what we did. David and I celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary last month. We've been through marriage counseling, individual therapy, and countless difficult conversations about trust, identity, and what it means to choose to love someone every day. I know I'm not the same man who married you, he said during our anniversary dinner, and you're not the same woman I fell in love with, but I like who we've become. I like the marriage we've built together. It's true. We're different people now, shaped by trauma, but not defined by it. We're more intentional about our relationship, more grateful for ordinary moments, more aware of how precious and fragile love really is. 10 years after reclaiming my life from Emma, I can finally see the full picture of what happened to our family. Emma's betrayal was devastating, but our recovery taught us things about love, identity, and resilience that we never would have learned otherwise. I'm not grateful for what Emma did. I'll never be grateful for the years of my children's lives I lost, for the trauma my family endured, for the innocence we can never reclaim. But I'm grateful for who we became in the process of surviving it. Jake is in college now, studying business with plans to expand the marketing firm I've rebuilt. He has Emma's organizational skills, but my creative instincts, my passion, but her discipline. Sometimes I see traces of the mother who raised him for 3 years, and I'm grateful that even Emma's deception gave him some valuable lessons. Michael is planning to become a family therapist, specializing in identity disorders and sibling relationships. He's turned our family's trauma into his life's mission, determined to help other families navigate similar crises. What happened to us was awful, he told me recently, but look what we did with it. Look how we turned the worst thing that ever happened to our family into something that could help other families. The business is thriving under my leadership, but it incorporates many of the improvements Emma made. I kept her organizational systems, her client management strategies, her expansion plans. I learned from watching her live my life even as I reclaimed it. Emma and I exchange Christmas cards now. Nothing more than that, but it's something. She sends pictures of her life with Robert. Hiking trips, quiet dinners, ordinary moments that look genuinely happy. She's built a small, authentic life that belongs entirely to her. Her cards always include the same message. Thank you for not disappearing. Thank you for fighting back. Thank you for teaching me that we're not the same person.
Looking back on everything that happened, people often ask me if I got my revenge on Emma. The answer is complicated. I didn't destroy her life the way she destroyed mine. I didn't have her committed or steal her identity or turn her loved ones against her. But I did something Emma couldn't survive. I refused to disappear. By fighting back, by reclaiming my life, by proving that I was the real Sarah Thompson, I forced Emma to confront the fact that she had never been me, could never be me, and didn't need to be me to have value. My revenge was living. My revenge was being authentic when she had been artificial, being real when she had been fake, being myself when she had tried to erase me. The greatest revenge against someone who tries to steal your identity is to live so fully, so authentically, so completely as yourself that their imitation looks hollow by comparison. Emma spent years perfecting her version of my life, but she could never replicate the genuine connections, the authentic love, the real relationships that made my life worth living. When my children recognized their real mother, when David chose to rebuild our marriage based on truth rather than performance, when my friends and clients learned to value authenticity over perfection, that was my revenge. I didn't need to destroy Emma to win. I just needed to be more myself than she could ever pretend to be. The woman who stole my life is in prison, not the physical prison where Emma served her sentence, but the psychological prison of knowing that even when she succeeded at being me, she failed at being herself. And me? I'm free. Free to be imperfect, free to be authentic, free to be Sarah Thompson. Messy, complicated, real,
and irreplaceable. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's betrayal make you disappear. Sometimes the best revenge is living so fully as yourself that no one could ever mistake an imitation for the real thing. What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? Let me know in the comments below. And if the story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. It helps me continue sharing these incredible stories of human resilience and the power of refusing to give up on yourself, no matter who tries to erase you. Remember, you are irreplaceable. No one can live your life better than you can. No matter how perfect someone else's imitation might seem, authenticity always wins in the end. Until next time, stay strong, stay true to yourself, and never let anyone convince you that they can be a better version of you than you are.